for me, what my message is, as I told Bridget, is that in the beginning, it's a 15-minute read. And when I get to DD, it ought to be a 30-minute read.
Okay, I'm going to say it right now. I don't know what DD is.
Design development.
Okay, I'm so glad that you all are not just playing Dungeons and Dragons while you're planning hospital facilities, an outpatient facility, residential. Welcome to Between the Lines with FGI, the podcast brought to you by the Facility Guidelines Institute. In this podcast series, we invite you to listen in on casual conversations related to health and residential care design and construction. Coming to you from Washington State, the state that harvests enough apples each year to circle the earth 20 times, is John Williams, FGI's VP of Content and Outreach and Chair of the 2026 Health Guidelines Revision Committee.
And joining from the birthplace of kindergarten in the United States, which began in St. Louis in 1873, is Bridget McDougall, Associate Editor with FGI. And we're both here because when we talk about design and construction of places where people receive care, we've got a lot of questions, and our bet is that you do too.
That's because there's a lot to be curious about under the umbrella of healthcare design and construction. We've got the codes that tell you how to build these spaces, right? But there's more there, between the lines, so to speak. And that's what we'll be exploring on this podcast with the help of invited guests and you along for the ride.
So, thanks for finding us, and let's get ready to read between the lines with FGI. So, Bridget, today we want to talk about the functional program, right?
That's right.
And guess what I have? A relic, if you will. The 1983-84 edition of the Guidelines for Construction and Equipment in Hospitals and Medical Facilities.
I was 11.
So in this document, I think we have the very first mention of the functional program. It says, and I quote, "The project sponsor shall provide a program of function."
A program of function.
Previous versions of the document call it the narrative program, but in 84, we string those two words together, functional program.
There it is in its infancy. So here's what I'm curious about. In that 1983-84 edition, where it talks about the program of function, you said?
Right.
The program of function, okay. Did it give you any more clarity then about what this thing is? Who writes it? Where does it reside? How it's used?
Not a bit. I think we're going to have to reach out to a phone a friend for that.
Have we not phoned the perfect friend for this? And that is Ken Cates. Today, we have the great opportunity to interview Ken Cates on our show. As co-founder of Northstar Management Company, Ken brings 4 decades of experience with construction and design, and that's a heck of a lot of experience with the functional program. Ken has worked on more than 1,000 projects, representing a cumulative value of more than $2.5 billion. Ken is a renowned speaker for education conferences and programs on the project process.
And gosh, when you listen to Ken talk about the functional program and the planning process, he is so passionate. I don't think we could have found a better guest.
Absolutely. Ken's been actively involved for many years with FGI, serving on the Health Guidelines Revision Committee, in addition to his board service.
Board president.
That's right. In 2009, Ken was honored with the Crystal Eagle Award from the American Society of Healthcare Engineering, which recognizes an outstanding ASHE member for excellent leadership qualities, innovation, and overall contribution to ASHE in the field of healthcare facility management.
I didn't know he was a Crystal Eagle.
He is. In 2012, Ken was inducted into the Southern Illinois University of Edwardsville Alumni Hall of Fame. So we are really excited to have Ken with us today on the show. Welcome, Ken Cates.
Thank you.
Yay! This is where there's going to just be tons of audio applause fill in. So you'll be speaking to crowds, at a coliseum.
Well, let me start by saying just how enormous this particular piece of the puzzle, of a project puzzle, is. in my 40 something years of experience, the use of or not the use of a functional program can determine how successful your project is.
That says a lot. So for folks who aren't familiar with the functional program, what is it?
So basically, though, to say, well, what is it? What is this thing? It's basically a written document or record of the purpose of a project and the key project requirements, both operations and facilities, that are to be included in that project. And if you think about design and construction industry, we do drawings and specifications and we build mock-ups. There is no other document, booklet that describes a project other than the functional program.
So, how long is this thing? Are we talking a page, a binder, binders?
So it's an easy read, Bridget, that if you picked up, I'm working on a project, big surgery center. If I gave you the functional program for that in 15 minutes or less, you would be able to read it and say, oh, I get it. I know what this project is and why they're doing it. And it's going to have all these kind of things in it.
We're not talking about binders and binders and binders in a basement.
No, it's meant to be an easy read. The problem if it's binders and binders is nobody reads it and gets put on the shelf. So it's that written record of what the project is. And I think just as importantly to that, when I say written record, is it's a living, breathing document. Projects start off very conceptual. What do we know about it? Not much. To detail, what size bolt? Does it have a washer or not? Okay. So it's living, breathing. And as we know, more information, you update it. But the intent is still, I give it to you, and in 15 minutes, you can read it and say, I get what you're doing here. Because people come and go on projects. And so when somebody comes to the project and says, say we're going to engage a head nurse of a unit, and then we had a concept plan, and here she comes along, who explains to her what that is? How does she know what that project is? Oh, well, we'll give you a set of drawings and specs. And in my experience, that's not going to work. You give the functional program, I get it.
Almost, I've heard it described as start with the end in mind and articulate that well enough so that we're all going down the same road.
Yeah, and I think what you're trying to do with this podcast series, I think, is what do we read in between the lines? So I would say in between the lines, what is it? It's a way to get the owner to be on the same page with what the project means, get the owner to approve that before the rest of the team, designers, contractors, go off and start spending all kinds of hours and money designing and building something to find out it's not what the owner really needs and expects.
Clarity.
So you mentioned the owner, you mentioned designers, contractors. There's a lot of players, right? Who is responsible for writing the functional program?
Great question. And I can tell you that there was hours of debate about this within the HGRC. Well, the guidelines call it the governing body, and that's for a reason. That's the owner. It's intended to be the owner. We spent a lot of time on that terminology, but settled on governing body because who is really in charge of whoever is in charge of the project. Now, owners will work with planners, architects, a lot of other people to put it together, but the owner is best positioned, and that's why we have it in the guidelines that way.
Excellent. So when you talk about producing one, I've seen folks struggle to produce a functional program or struggle to get one from a facility. One of the common refrains that I always hear is that imagining a comprehensive functional program can be pretty overwhelming. So when you hear that question or that concern, how do you help people get started?
Pretty common question. I would say in general, people are overwhelmed by the notion of it and don't want to do it. People would say, well, why can't we just get to designing? This is a waste of time. So you really got to talk about the value proposition there. Okay, well, what's the purpose, the rationale for doing the project? How do we expect to operate it? What, size? We wrote those requirements to keep it simple and acceptable to owners. Lay out the parts and say, here's the benefit of doing that, and here's the time associated with it. Usually, when you do that, and you can show a good example of it, owners will say, I get it, and that's what I want to do. Because, quite frankly, I don't want to be approving $100 million for a project that I don't know these other things.
So you were talking about the different types of people who use the functional programming. How do you see that an AHJ would use this?
Well, first of all, I would say that the guidelines' primary focus on defining what a functional program is to help the AHJ do their job. The AHJs are actively involved in and have been for helping us write these. I think the AHJs view it as this is an efficiency tool for them. They get up the learning curve immediately, and it comes out of the gate talking about what's enforceable or not enforceable.
Absolutely. When I have my AHJ hat on, my regulatory hat, I always think of it as the thing that helps me apply the guidelines the right way.
It is so critical the way it is written, the words that are used, words matter. We went from 2010 to 2014 really revamping the language and the guidelines related to functional program. And a lot of that was driven by our AHJ partners saying, my world is crazy. I've got limited resources, lessons learned. You bring me these things and it's approved by the owner, I'll get it reviewed and get you, approval or comments very quickly.
Help me take the idea of the process of writing a functional program off of the pages of the guidelines. We talk about all the different folks that are involved, but I'm really imagining in real life, in the day-to-day, who starts with it and how do they go around to these different players and get their input? What does that look like?
Okay, great question. So let's think about it in some key buckets of who are we say multidiscipline. Who do we mean by that? Okay. So it's driven by the owner. So the owner saying, I want to move forward with this project. I mean, your chief executive officer is going to be driving vision. Sometimes they're a strategy person. The financial person is going to say, how much can we afford? Then you've got to pull in key stakeholders from that particular department, bring department expertise. Then you got to have somebody from your facilities group participate in it, okay? So the multidiscipline team starts with the executive, and then they go out to the market and bring in others. That's how the basic team is put together.
And you make a good point about that strategic approach, because when people are building these buildings, they're building them to last for decades. So when they think about, well, I do these types of surgeries today, how do you factor in the idea of what types of surgeries are we going to be doing 10 years from now or 15 years from now? Or is that even a consideration?
I mean, this topic has got a lot of detail to it. It's what does the future look like with technology? What does the future look like with staffing? What does the future look like with patients accessing? So, the way you get there is you involve people in this discussion during functional programming that are big thinkers. You bring in your key physicians who are attending conferences where they're talking about this. You bring in your nursing staff. All of those folks, the leaders of all of those groups are engaged at a higher level with their profession. And those are the kind of things they talk about. And again, honestly, it's a couple hour meeting and you get the right people in the room, you facilitate a discussion. It's a couple paragraphs. And then what's cool is when you see that in a functional program and the executives in the owner side, may be in those, may not be in those, they read that section. It's like we're forward thinking, we're being comprehensive, not designing this cool little project here in a bubble. And it just starts off the whole thought process of design of both facilities and operations with a future mindset. Does that make sense?
That's probably the most helpful thing I've heard anyone say is what you just said about we're talking a couple hours in a room, key people around, and out of that comes a couple paragraphs.
It's really, all you need. Now, I will tell you the challenge is you got to have a leader of the process. Doing a functional program is a mini project unto itself. It involves a lot of people. You got to bring rigor to the process. You got to put things in order. So you got to have somebody that can drive it, which is, pretty hard because what goes with that is you better have the time to drive it. And so to me, what you do when you're talking about the value of functional programming, what it is, like we're doing here, in that conversation needs to be some honest dialogue about who are the right people that should participate in leading the process, in participating in in writing the information. One of my big, in between the lines is just because you're an expert in a certain area, that doesn't mean you know how to write.
So it sounds like you need at least one person with strong project management kind of skills. You need somebody who's really good at writing and translating between different types of jargon, and then a whole host of experts that can look at it, provide content, and edit.
And if you manage the schedule with, like you said, John, the right project manager, they'll come to the meeting and know it's going to be efficiently run. I know what to expect. They're going to take my input and they're going to capture it. It's worth my time. I'll go.
So important.
It's so important. If people don't show up to the meetings, because it's a given, they're all too busy. If they don't show up to the meetings, how are you going to get that intel? And who does that then what happens to the quality of the functional program? Well, back to my beginning statement, if all of that starts to erode, nobody really knows what the project is. And here we are, a freight train, 110 miles an hour. We got designers drawing stuff. We got contractors digging holes for foundations. Has anybody really understood and signed off on what that is?
Right. And to your point, these folks are really busy. And that key piece of being able to say, I trust this person to capture my concept. I trust this person to capture the intent or the core bits of the information.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to build your team where you have whomever is facilitating the meeting, so they're a great project leader and such, should not be the person trying to take the notes. Okay. And, this team is made up of, you've got an architect planner, maybe you have engineers, maybe you have facility manager. Anybody who you're looking for their expertise and their ears to really be hearing what's going on, you should not expect them to be taking the notes.
So let's assume we've got the right project team, we've got a great project manager, a great editor, and you've got this buy-in from, the main folks that have the content. Where have you seen people get stuck?
Cost and schedule. That's the 800-pound elephant in the room. As a good practice, organization should be establishing a project budget and schedule based on a thorough functional program, right? Your less guessing leads to more certainty. So where they hit a wall is, you go through this process and people dream big. And then when folks try to put a number to it and a schedule to it, it shocks people.
It seems like to be successful, it seems like you need to have a real clear, intentional level setting of expectations in the beginning of the process and say, hey, this is going to be something we need to invest time in.
I think as an industry, what would really help us all is a really good example, maybe a handbook that says, here's how to go about doing it, sort of a master's class in this, and then include a really good example or maybe example for a small, simple project to a complicated project that you can hand an executive And in 15 minutes, they read it and say, I want to do that. And maybe that's something I try to focus on as I'm slowing down in my career. But as an industry, that's what we need. It sells, and I don't mean the word sells in a derogatory way. You've got to convince the executives at a healthcare organization they need to do this.
It's about that value proposition.
Yeah. So when I showed them this example, even with all the black magic marker stuff out of there, they're like, well, I want to do, that's what I want to do. We're going to do that.
Why would we not?
Why would we not do that? So then it's, here it is. Here's our table. Here's table of contents. Here's the kind of people that participate. Because, by the way, in the example I gave them, it showed all the multidiscipline players that participated in putting it together. I think that goes back to John's comment. John's saying, how do you help people because they feel overwhelmed or don't understand it? Back to your original question, I think that's what we have to do. And where I've evolved to is I've created this example, and that's what I show them, and I review it with them. Here's the layout, boom, boom, boom. Go take and read it. And it's like immediate. We're doing that.
Ken, folks are going to say, where is that example?
I know.
Give me that example. Where is it?
Well,
Do you have it buried in the backyard somewhere? We got to know.
Farm garden.
File 13. I'm just saying that, I think the question was, what should we do related to education? There's a great opportunity here for us collectively as an industry to do this. There's tons of experience out there doing these things. So everything I'm saying here, anybody with experience that's done functional programs is going to say the same and agree with me on the challenges that we face. It's a matter of what do we do about it? If it's really that great, which it is, what do we do about it to make it like selling ice cream on the beach? Everybody wants some.
Yeah. A crash course in functional program herding, a crash course in functional program design, or something like that.
I got to ask the napkin question. So I was at a conference last year and I was in a room and folks were asked, how many know about the functional program? Spattering of hands went up. How many people write them? An even more disturbing spattering, in my opinion. So to speak to your opportunity for education. But someone mentioned at that conference that it can be as small as a sketch on a napkin. Sketch on a napkin, Ken. Tell me, is that true?
Well, directionally correct. But you got to write a paragraph about what the purpose is. Picture doesn't tell what the purpose of the project.
So you're going to need a bigger napkin, is what you're saying.
You need a big, but I think that person is correct in that if you're doing a simple, just we're going to renovate a nursing unit. It's cosmetic. We're not changing the walls. We've got distributed nursing. We got things operationally. It is working well, but man, it looks beat up and worn out, and the patient experience is not as ideal as it should be. So we're going to redo the walls and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's a couple page, but you say that the existing MEP systems are in great shape and providing what needs to be provided. The layout configuration works with our current nursing model and what we predict our future will be. It's 2 pages.
And then as an AHJ, I love those kind of functional programs because I can quickly go through it and go, okay, well, you're not starting to sedate people in these rooms. You're not restraining people in this space. You're not turning this patient room into an operating room. Quickly, if I can go down and validate that the function isn't really changing, that makes it so much easier.
Oh, yeah, right. And you just got to say that, though. That's where the napkin needs to include a paragraph that says, but what it does, and I mentioned this earlier, is that it says to the AHJ, it also says to the design team, the owner has reviewed and approved, agrees with this scope of work.
Ken, you're an incredible wealth of information, both on the functional program and all things FGI and guidelines for John and I, and to be able to share that with a greater audience and listeners is incredible. I easily could spend a solid, I was going to say afternoon, but week with breaks. I could come back in solid week and pick your brain about the functional program. So we thank you.
I appreciate those comments. But it didn't just fall in my lap. It's hard work. I've made a lot of mistakes, guys. I mean, the reason I know what will and won't work lots of times is because I did it and it didn't work. That's just experience gets you that. And hopefully people with less experience will value those of us with experience and say, if he or she is making that big a deal out of it, it's probably got some merit. So maybe I ought to think about how to do it.
Well, that leads to my wrap-up question for you, and that would be, what would Ken Cates today, say to the Ken Cates that just learned about the functional program years ago?
That's a great question, Bridget. There's lots of things I would say, but related to functional program, I would say go convince someone, Ken, go find somebody with great experience who is trusted and respected, and somehow convince them to let you shadow them and have them as your mentor instead of the other ways that I went about it. I had some people, most of my career, I've been blessed with people that have said, come here, Sonny, here's some pearls. And I've taken those. But if I were young on the functional, now knowing what I know now, is I would be more assertive to get snuggy up to somebody in my circle there and say, I'll come in after hours. Can I take you to lunch every other week or once a month? And let me pick your brain and value it and do something with it. I would do that because that gets you up the learning curve sooner.
Great advice, Ken. We can't thank you enough for joining us today.
I agree. I've learned so much from this brief conversation. We appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you both, though, for you and your team for putting in the time to do this, guys. This is big bang for the buck for FGI. And I appreciate you accelerating the schedule to make it happen. Really, genuinely, this is a big win for us, and it didn't happen without much effort on your part. So thank you.
Oh, we're really excited about it, and we strategically picked our dream folks for the first few interviews. So the fact that we are speaking to you says a lot about how we feel about your value and what you bring. So thank you.
I'm very honored, and I do hope that it helps a lot of people. I'm really thrilled to be a part of it, and you guys are great. I love it. I love the energy.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Between the Lines with FGI. Have an idea for an episode? Get in touch with us by writing to podcast@fgiguidelines.org.
And if you're interested in becoming a sponsor for one or more of these episodes, you can reach out to us at the same address, podcast@fgiguidelines.org.
Thanks to Neil Kane and the Neil Kane Trio for the use of his song Skip to My Lou from the album of the same name.
And join us next time as we go between the lines with FGI. Goodbye, everybody.
See you next time.